to the Communicating Outside Our Circle learning session, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have some fun today. I'm Polly Rulin, CEO at the United Soybean Board. You know, we hear over and over again about how consumers continue to have extremely important questions about their food, where their food comes from, the biotech that's used in production of modern agriculture, sustainability, carbon capture. What don't we have questions about? And coronavirus, the situation has given us a real unique opportunity in agriculture to connect more fully and dialogue with those folks who eat what we produce. So today we have a really great roundtable discussion for you focused on making connections with consumers about the good work farmers are doing to provide nutritious and sustainable food. We're also going to talk about some of the harder conversations we might have to have and how to handle those harder conversations. Today, we have the pleasure of chatting with a couple of very accomplished communicators, Vance Crowe and Yin James. Both have excellent perspectives and tips to share about connecting with people, dialoguing with people, and learning how to have a conversation with our customers rather than move along and tell them what we want them to know, which I think is largely how agriculture has treated consumers in the past. Vance helps organizations understand what those outside of their circles are thinking and why they may have very different perspectives than we do, and how to become open to that dialogue that may educate them or change how they think. Yin is a leadership expert who challenges people to prioritize, focus, and pay attention. She has a huge toolbox of practical strategies we can apply to connect with people and make a difference. So United Soybean Board sponsored this session because our farmer leaders believe in the impact of engaging at every level in the value chain, including the consumer level. So I mentioned COVID and the unique opportunity we have in conversations with consumers. I always say that food enters at one place in the chain, and that's farmers. Cash only enters at one place in the chain, and that's consumers. So making sure that consumers and the companies that talk to them have a close and personal dialogue with farmers is very, very important. We are especially interested in engaging those consumers and end users in a dialogue about soy sustainability and agriculture sustainability in general. I strongly believe that agriculture is the answer to addressing many of the sustainability metrics that today's consumer and end user cares about, and indeed that today's government has made a platform for sustainability into the next era. We operate in farming under the social license given to us by the folks that infuse cash into the system. That means we operate at the pleasure of our consumers and at the pleasure of our end users every day. A couple of years ago, USB did a study with a company called Evolve 24 that shows that ag, including the soy community, as much as I hate to admit it, is talking a lot more to ourselves inside our circle than we are talking to those outside of our circles. We're not very good at reaching out to other people, particularly those that we may have predetermined don't agree with us all the time. My experience with engaging with NGOs throughout my career and other people who may not agree with us is that most people are rational, most people are respectful, and we almost always have shared values that if we explore that conversation, we can find those shared values. So your voice matters. Farmers' voices matter. We're less than 1% of the population, but we're the only ones that grow food. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that dialogue is important and give you specific tips and help about how you can engage better in that conversation today. We're going to have each panelist give a little bit of an intro and some introductory thoughts to get the questions flowing, but the best part is the Q&A. So we'll have about 20 minutes, most of the session, to have Q&A from you, and we really want you to engage and ask questions of us, because that's always the most fun part of these sessions is the open Q&A. We are live today. None of this is pre-recorded. So we should get some really interesting things coming forward, and we're really looking forward to it. All of us are super excited about this. So next, let's talk with Vance Crowe, who I mentioned is a communication strategist. He's worked for corporations and international organizations around the world. He's spoken before more than 150,000 people, better him than me, answering questions about some of the most sophisticated and controversial technologies in agriculture and in our modern age. He helps organizations understand what those outside their circles, which is what we need to really focus on here, are thinking and why they might have very different perspectives and how often those perspectives are rational perspectives and have good reasons. So today he's here to share new ways to communicate effectively. Now, I mentioned he's worked for a lot of organizations, World Bank, Monsanto, Peace Corps, and even as a deckhand on a ecotourism ship. So I think that if you need a cleanup, Vance is your man. So please feel free to add questions in the chat as we continue this session, and welcome, Vance.
Thanks, Polly. So that was a marvelous introduction. And I think the part of the introduction that I want to highlight is my time as the director of millennial engagement with Monsanto. I came in about 7 years ago, and at the time, Twitter was still somewhat novel. There was still a lot to be done with Facebook. There were so many people still being added into that, finally deciding, should I join Facebook? Should I get on Twitter? What is going on with Instagram? And so a lot of those ideas that we first had when we were talking about farmers need to get out and talk with the wider public was a lot about volume. It was about just being there. It was about being available so that somebody could encounter a farmer, because otherwise they were just in their own circles as well. And now, fast forward about 7 years since I started that role, the entire world of social media has changed. And I think that everyone is very clear that it's unlikely that the shape of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter will be the same 1 year from today that it is right now. And the rate of change is actually increasing, and I don't think it'll ever slow down. So the first thing that I want to talk about, if you're thinking about engaging with the broader public, is a concept that I call the social media archipelago. So an archipelago is a string of islands. You can think of the Florida Keys, or when you look at Indonesia, you see all these little islands dotted. And in those places where there have been people living there for thousands of years, what ends up happening on each one of those islands is that they don't know each other very well. They live in their own little island. They are doing things in their own way. And it's why entirely different languages are created in one island versus one that's maybe just 20 miles away across the ocean. And this is, I believe, going to happen in social media in a really dramatic way. As people say, the things that I liked about Twitter in the past, now I'm not allowed to say, or it's difficult for me to find the people that are talking about the things that I care about. They're going to splinter off. And on the one hand, you could feel like this is a great thing that really gives me freedom, right? Now I can go to an island where the people that think like me or are open to my kinds of ideas, we can go here and we can have these discussions. But just as Polly said, if you go to those islands and you stay on those islands, you will only be talking to yourself. And you will actually develop a culture, a language, a way of thinking about others. Really, all of the things that make you and us will be different from all of the people on all of the other islands. And so I think it's important to recognize that, one, this is going to happen, and two, to ask yourself, as I am engaging on social media, if a part of it, if what I want to do is to advocate for my industry so that way I have a market to sell to, that there are people that are interested in what I'm saying, you have to ask yourself, is it better for me to go to an island where I'm free, or is it better for me to exist on an island where I'm not as free, but I'm encountering people that don't think like I do? And I don't think that there is necessarily a correct answer to this question, but it really comes down to what's right for you. And I think maybe the most important concept to think about is when you're putting together your persona and you're putting effort and energy into what you're going to build, this relationship with your audience, I think that in the future and going forward, it's important, and this is a concept that really resonates with agriculture, to not build barns on rented land. And what I mean by that is if you don't own the space, if you don't have the domain name, if you don't have the spot that says, I pay for this space for me to put my ideas out there, then all of the audience that you're creating can be taken away because rules change or because people say, hey, these are no longer ideas that we want here. And so all of this effort that you've put into it, this real lifeblood that you've spilled there, trying to build an audience, trying to have rational conversations, trying to build up your reputation as somebody that can communicate with other people, can be in jeopardy. And so while I don't think everyone should go out and have their own domain, I think it's a really important thing for you to think about. Do I want to build barns on land that was rented and could be rented to somebody else just as quickly? Now, that being said, one of the things that I think will help agriculture transcend whatever happens with this social media archipelago are two things that I think are deep and a part of who farmers actually are. And those two things that I think can make you uniquely able to reach out to other people are comedy and a depth of knowledge. And the reason that I think comedy is so important is, what is humor? What is a joke? A joke is taking one idea and connecting it to another idea in a way that people didn't see. But when they do make that connection, everybody sends that social signal, ha ha ha. And the reason that you send that social signal is because we all want to know, like, I get it. I see how those two things are connected. And the real evidence of this is you can imagine the time when you're sitting in a group of people and everybody else is making that ha ha ha, might as well be aha sound, and you don't actually see how they're connected. You feel propelled, compelled to laugh along with people because we want to be a part of the connection that people make when they have a joke. Now, that's the power of comedy. And I believe in agriculture, this is something that is honed from a very early age. It is something that people do to rib one another. It's a way to show who's in the in group and who's doing things they shouldn't be doing, and a way to say, like, this is us and this is them. And on its face, humor can be one of those things that's exclusionary. It can be one of those things that says, we're farmers and we get these jokes, but other people don't. So our group is laughing and they're not. That only further confirms the social media archipelago. So what I would recommend is concepts like self-deprecating humor or humor that transcends the boundaries that you're already in. And there's two people that I think many people on this call are probably aware of, but if you're not, one is a guy named Dwayne Faber. He goes by dfaber84 on Twitter. He has transcended the boundaries of who a dairy farmer should be talking to because of the way that he makes jokes. Some of his jokes are about agriculture, but oftentimes they're about being married, about being a father of daughters, about the challenges that go along with life. And so people tune in for those jokes, and then they get a glimpse of what it's like to be a part of dairy. And you can do this in your own way, but Dwayne has found a very effective way to expand his reach. And in truth, when newspapers want to write an article about what's going on with the dairy industry, the first dairy farmer they call is the one that they already follow on Twitter. The other guy that I think is very compelling is a guy named Quick Dick McDick. And that's a pseudonym, obviously, for a Saskatchewan grain farmer that started making YouTube videos that are really interesting and compelling because they're so funny. And you can see that his audience first was grain farmers that were all laughing about his joke about it's nippy out, and he makes a whole song about it. But then you start to see that these jokes and these videos transcend those cultural boundaries of farming, and they get into the cities, and his audience just continues to rapidly grow. So comedy is one of those things that's going to play in that social media archipelago, whether it's YouTube or Twitter or other mediums like things like Substack or Clubhouse or Discord threads. And in that way, I think the other talent that agriculture has is really valuable here. And that is that you know a great deal about many topics. As a farmer, you can't just be, I know how to put seeds in the ground and how to put the right chemicals on them so they grow. You have to know about soil health. You have to know about sunshine and heat units. But then you also have to know about marketing and trade and international relations. There are so many people out in the world that want to have a view into the other areas that you know about, like what you know about how trade is working, or what you see as somebody that is watching the value of the dollar, and the way that you can explain it using the metaphors that you have from spending all of this time day in and day out doing this. So if you get on a platform like Discord or Substack or some of these places that you maybe have never heard of, Medium, you're allowed to write in a really deep way something that you know that's very complex, and share it with people that aren't with agriculture, but they can say, I can use that deep knowledge for my own thing. So that even if you do get on your own island, you're sharing ideas out that people on other islands find valuable. So to wrap up before I hand off to Neen is to really think about, what is it that I naturally like to do? Do I like to do deep dives? Do I like to explain things? Then maybe you want to start thinking about writing in these fuller form areas, and jumping out into places like Substack and Discord. Or if you're a guy that likes to make jokes, or a woman that's like clever with the things that she's talking about, make sure you're trying to experiment with that and use jokes to expand your circle, so that even if you end up going into an island in this archipelago, you can transcend that and get your message out to the consumers that Polly brought up. So Polly, I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, thanks, Vance. I particularly, maybe we can get into this later, but I'm particularly interested in the concept of comedy, because I think there are really two ways you can handle comedy, and I've heard folks in ag handle them both ways. One of them is kind of making fun of consumers and what they don't know, and one of them is referencing, the common areas we share. So maybe that's an area we can get into later. Also, I have a question here that we'll address later. Just keep it in your mind, and that is more information on the barn that you talked about. If we can't own our barns, then how do we decide where to rent them, or who's best, or where's best to rent them? So keep those in the hopper, and we will address them a little later. So Neen, you're on next. Neen is a leadership expert with a very unusual name, who challenges audiences to leverage their focus and basically pay attention to what matters most in work and life. All of our audiences really love, and I've had the opportunity to see her speak previously, love the practical strategies, very practical strategies she offers to learn how to pay attention, to really listen, and really engage. She earned her MBA at Southern Cross University, and she is a certified speaking professional from the National Speakers Association. Lots of awards behind her name as far as a professional speaker. She has authored 9 books, including Folding Time, which is a fascinating concept, is it not? I think Einstein would have approved. And her recent book called Attention Pays. She was named one of the top 30 leadership speakers by Global Guru several years in a row because of her work with companies like Viacom, Comcast, Cisco, Johnson & Johnson, hey, vaccine maker, and the FBI, which she could tell you about, but then she'd have to kill you. So let's open it up, Neen, and don't forget the Q&A box open for questions, folks. So come in.
I love it. Well, g'day, everyone. What a treat it is to serve you all. If my grandfather was alive today, I think this would be one of his proud moments. I am the very proud granddaughter of farmers, lots of family, aunts, uncles, the whole thing. Now, chances are, as you're listening, I've already got your attention. You're sitting there and you're wondering, does she know she sounds like she's 5? I do. So hopefully you are okay with that. Now that is an example of self-deprecating humor, because Vance, honey, that's all we have. Australians have self-deprecating humor and sarcasm. Sarcasm doesn't always fly so well in parts of the USA, I have learned. But when I work with leaders in agriculture, they often want to know, how do I get attention so they can build engagement? They want to be able to build those authentic connections that we all crave. And let's be honest, attention is all about connection. And so when farmers are looking for the answer to that question, how do they get attention? They often focus on the metrics rather than the meaning behind the metrics. And I believe that systems direct our attention. You all have systems in your everyday. And so what we need to think about as leaders in this industry is, how do we create systems of attention? Social media is just a system. And so in our time together today, what I'd like to explore with you is really 3 systems that you may want to consider to be able to help expand outside of our circle so that people can have a greater awareness of the value that you deliver in the world. To build on Vance's great comments about showcasing your depth of expertise. One thing that I would suggest is that you think about this whole concept of barns. The question was out there about don't build your barn on rented land. Think about things you control. You probably subscribe to newsletters. The newsletter belongs to the person who's authored that newsletter. That is a great example of building a list, a community that you can connect to and have direct access to them, because that's not going to change. That's going to be yours. And so I have a newsletter where I communicate to people every week. We have a chat. It's called Notes from Neen, and I share lots of strategies that they can use. But our system today, I want you to write down 3 words, 3 important ways that you can think about really grabbing and keeping people's attention. Those words are virtual, video, and visuals. And we've already started talking about some of them. Let's jump into virtual. At ASA, I had the privilege of serving where Polly and I got connected, of serving and sharing a framework. We need to be able to articulate the expertise that we have. And so one thing that I did was I shared a strategy of how you can really grab someone's attention and keep it in less than 90 seconds. This framework is called an attention matrix, and I'm sure we can make that available for you on the sponsor page as a resource. But one thing we have to think about is, as leaders, we have to get comfortable in a virtual environment. You have to get comfortable on camera. I don't care if you like it or not. That is our communication methodology right now. And so one thing we have to think about is not just getting comfortable in virtual, but how can we personalize it? How can we customize it? So the first system is to leverage what is already widely used, and that is our virtual opportunities. Now, some of you are already hanging out with your grandkids on FaceTime, so you know how to do this. Many of you are attending this for the first time virtually, and I know we are missing the hugs and the handshakes and the opportunity to have a cocktail together. That's if you drink a cocktail. I do. I'm Australian. But one thing to think about is let's get really comfortable in virtual so you can share your expertise on scale. You can have fabulous conversations one-on-one. One thing I loved about wandering around town with my grandfather is everybody knew him. And I bet you're the same. Everybody knows you in your community. And so as soon as they see you walk down the street, when I was little, I thought my grandfather was the mayor because everyone treated him with such respect and importance. And I bet the same happens to you. But we don't have that luxury right now, many of us. And so getting really good at virtual is strategy number 1. System number 2 is video, because video is our future. This is how we're communicating. You have incredible stories that translate so powerfully using video. And Vance already shared with you a great person to watch on YouTube to see how they're using story. But I was thinking for you, video is so powerful. Now, there's really simple things you can do. You can grab your cell phone, you can shoot a little video, and you can text that to someone. And that gives them a sense of you, your tone, and allows them to see your expertise. You can very easily send email messages that are video now. So there are services where you can share your expertise using small snippets of video. Instead of being one of 200 emails in someone's inbox, you can stand out and get attention using video. Another very easy thing to think about is social media has made it very easy for you to share your story. If you want to be authentically connected to people, social media is so easy. Now, you may not like all the platforms, and you don't have to be on every platform. You've got to be on the platforms that make the most sense to you. I would think that Instagram would be a lovely place for many of you to play. And the reason is it's so visual. But one thing we have to think about as leaders in this industry is how do we stop the scroll? How do we stop people from scrolling past you? Video gets attention so much quicker than photos, which gets more attention than text. So think about, could you create small videos so you could share with people what you're experiencing throughout the seasons? And so one thing to think about, the second system is, can you embrace video in small ways? Video also allows you to customize it. The reason I love being able to send videos is because I can use people's names, I can use their company, and it is very personal attention. The third system, when it comes to really being able to communicate outside your circle, and remember, we have to get comfortable communicating with non-farmers. We need to be able to break it down in a way that makes it very easy for people to understand the value and how what we do has a major impact, not just on the economy, but on the world at large. And if we can language it in ways that make sense to people, another easy system, the third one, is using visuals. Now, visuals are things like social media. Vance has already talked about a couple of those ways. But think about, you don't have to post every single day. That's like a full-time job. But think about throughout the week, could you tell a story? Could you show us a video? Could you make a comment? Could you put your fabulous expertise in a text and then pop that out and send it? But I want you to think about not just using platforms like Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever people are that you want to be connected to, but could you paint visual pictures for people? One of the most powerful tools you all have available to you is the use of metaphor. The great thing about metaphor is you are walking metaphors. If you just look around your property, there are so many great metaphors that you have right there at your fingertips. Metaphor is interesting because if you think about the way that the brain works, when you think about the left hemisphere, which is very focused on analytics and checklists and data, and the right hemisphere, which is very much about rhythm and reason and rhyme and color, what happens is when you tell someone a metaphor, it switches on the right hemisphere of their brain and creates a visual picture. Here's another trick with metaphors. Metaphors are memorable, repeatable, and retweetable. So when you're sharing your story, think about very quickly giving a metaphor so people understand what you're trying to tell them. The last thing I would say when it comes to really painting a visual picture as a system is think about these three words: global, local, global. Here's what I mean by that. Whenever I work with executives on presenting their message into the world, I always teach them to start high level, global. Give me some detail, local, but always finish on global. Global, local, global. If you want a very simple, very quick way to tell a story, tell me how the story relates to the big picture. Give me a little bit of detail so you have me intrigued, and then finish off with how it really does impact things in a bigger way. Global, local, global. The beautiful thing about global, local, global is in every audience you speak to, there are some people who are very big picture. They just want to see the model or they want to hear the metaphor. But there are people in your audience who want the detail. They want to know about a story or they want to know the statistics. As master communicators, I want to invite you to consider appealing to all kinds of people when you speak, using the power of virtual, using video, and using visuals. So I would love to be able to help. We've got so many questions, I'm sure, already coming in, but that's 3 V's I want you to think about in addition to all the things that Vance has shared with us as well. Polly, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Neen. That was the one part that I really loved that I didn't catch when I heard you the last time was the global, local, global. And I think oftentimes, even though that sounds like a simple formula, that's not easy to do. It's not easy to think big, draw it down to your life, and then think big again. So that kind of thinking is something that everybody could work on. I know I can. But also what really spoke to me is that I find on my Twitter feed that oftentimes some of my most popular posts are not necessarily about agriculture. They're about my life, right? They're a little slice of my life. Like sometimes I'll post something I cook for dinner and it's really very popular. And I think, well, this wasn't that great, you know?
Holly, people want to peek behind the curtain. They want to know what's going on behind. And so that's the beautiful thing about different platforms. Instagram on the grid, which is where people see mostly, on the grid could be very specific about video and things happening with the farm, but the story can be where you give people a little peek behind the curtain. So there's different ways to use the platforms. And I think, like I said, attention's about connection. People want to connect with you at a deeper level. Social media allows you to do that on scale.
It's so true. So great. We'll move into the Q&A because we do have a couple of questions already up. And I've got a couple of questions too if we run out, but I don't think we're going to. So Jack asks, he says, my historic ag communication training focused on reaching the fence sitters, and not give much energy to the people on the other side of the fence. Is that still the case that you're talking about here? Vance, let's start with you.
You know, it's hard to imagine what fence sitting means in a modern age, because it's not like people are sitting there saying, should I buy soybeans or should I not buy soybeans, right? It's really more of a, how does this fit into our culture? How should I feel about this? Do I like this? And I think that the more productive way to go is not going looking for people that are kind of maybe thinking about soybeans, because I don't necessarily know that they exist in the same way that I don't know that they exist with modern agriculture, but instead trying to find where is their common interest that you know something about that they are also interested in. It's one of the reasons why like sports is such an interesting way to transcend what we already think about things, because you can have two people that come from totally opposite ends of a political spectrum or an ideological spectrum, but they both like the same team. And once people understand, hey, this is a person that I run into regularly, this is a person that I accept their points of view on whether it's sports or trade or other ideas, then they're going to be way more open and thinking that they're on your team and you're on their team. And so those are the people that end up growing your audience, that are supportive of you over the long haul.
Yeah, absolutely. Need on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think Vance makes a really good point about that. And one other thing I would add to that is that talk to one person. When I post on social media, I'm talking to one person. It happens to be millions of people are reading it, but it's one person. So think about communicating as if we were just sitting around having a little chat. But the other thing that I would recommend is, beyond even thinking about one person, think about designing conversations for your advocates. Focus on the people who really do resonate with your message, who also want to be able to share that message. It's not my job to convince people of my opinion. That's pointless. That's not really going to help anybody. My job is to stand in service of the audience. That's it. And when we stand in service, you can't really be nervous about anything you post, because what you're doing is standing in service. When we stand in service as leaders within the agricultural community, we have such a story to tell, and we have a story that people don't all know about. So let's tell our story to the one person who's listening, to the advocate, because those fence sitting, I agree with Vance. I don't know these days if that's really the case. Now, there's lots of people with strong opinions that may be very different to yours, but one thing just to think about is really focus in on those who can help us spread the word, who can help take a positive view. I personally choose, wherever humanly possible, to only share in a positive light. And I tend to ignore the crazies who are going to not agree with you anyway. So there's no point in arguing with them. So don't get into an argument on social media. It doesn't serve anybody. Either have a direct conversation, pick up the phone, but don't be doing that on social media. That's not going to help you.
You know, it's really interesting. To Jack's point, PR and communications as a field has changed like astrally in the last little while. And I'm a person of a certain age who was trained a long time ago in PR communications. One thing that was the hardest thing for me to get used to was when we first started using the internet for communications, we used to talk about controlling the message. I don't know if you remember back then, but we need to control the message. And that used to be like a key tenet of communications, controlling the message. Well, you know, today, the best stuff is authentic and uncontrolled. And Vance, I know you have a kind of an opinion on how this chaos is actually better than controlling the message.
Yeah, so I often use the imagery of the Yin Yang sign, right? Which when I was growing up, small town Illinois, I always thought that the white was good and the black was evil, and that's just as sophisticated of an idea as I had. But over time, I've come to realize that the Yin Yang sign is actually a dichotomy between ordered, what is known and understood, what you control, and the black side being the unknown, the chaos, the things that you don't know. And our tendency is to think that the unknown is dangerous and the ordered is good, particularly if you're farmers, right? You became successful farmers and have survived to be in the last 1% because you're extremely ordered. You put things in exactly the same order, you only change one variable at a time, you check it very carefully. But the thing is that all new things, all new ideas, all new ways of thinking, everything that happens that is change, progress, movement forward, comes from the chaos. And so when we think about humor, when we think about controlling the message or trying to get new messages out there, if you do what has already been done, no one will pay attention because our brains are primed to look at things and say, is this a tool or is this an obstacle? And when something's new, they don't already know. They haven't categorized if it's helpful to them or if it's going to get in their way or if it's something they should ignore. So when you're describing like the chaos that I like, I really think that if you want to make a difference, you have to be on the edge of chaos, which is one foot in what you know and what is ordered, and one foot out a little bit, doing something different. And when Neen was using the idea of stopping the scroll, that is what people are looking for. They're looking for novelty, something they haven't seen before, something that captures their attention, and then you can have that discussion. And so sometimes when you get on the edge of chaos, just like surfing, you're going to fall off the board and get wrapped up in the wave. But in order for you to make any progress, you have to get on that wave.
Yeah.
See what he did there? Use a metaphor. Brilliant. I love it.
You have to get on the wave. And I've had several that I've noticed, the barn, the wave. I mean, we're describing the world here. That's wonderful. And Neen, what about you? Are you more comfortable or less comfortable with chaos? And how does that sharpen your saw?
I'm Australian, and so chaos is very comfortable to me. And I also am a person who loves change and embraces change, but I also understand that not everybody has that same filtering system, right? One thing that I do love is opportunity to be curious. So whether you are comfortable or uncomfortable during chaos, what you can choose is curiosity. You can choose, well, what questions can I ask about this? Or how can we present this in a different way? Or what do I need to learn about this? One of my favorite questions when I'm working with people is, what am I missing here? And I think one thing we can do as leaders is we can think about, well, how do I articulate my value in a time where we have to be able to get people's attention and stop the scroll? And how can I do that in a way that will answer questions people might have? And a very simple way to do that is be blatant and say, hey, something I'm always asked is this. Something that we've found has been really helpful in chaos or in changing times. We are living in the most uncertain times that we've experienced. We've never been through a global pandemic before, most of us. There's no rules. There's no right way to do this, right? But what we have done is realized what we can control and what we can't, how we can respond and how we don't. These are all choices we're making. And so when it comes to our communication, we've got to be very conscious about the choices we make and the actions we take. And that's one of the things we explore a lot in the book Attention Pays, because attention's all about intention. So intentional attention is those choices we make and actions we take. So regardless of whether you're in calm or chaos, and I don't know many farmers' lives who are calm all the time. That's just me, but I don't know many of you. If you are, you're welcome to message me. But we live in this space of chaos. And so I think we have to really be conscious about those choices and share our story in those sound bites, in those metaphors, in all the strategies you've heard talked about here today, regardless of where you find yourself.
I like that point about intention, because one of the things I always remind myself is that we can't ever know someone else's intent. And so I work really hard to not assume I know what they're talking about, not assume intent, because guess what? My assumptions of intent are based on my personal experience, not theirs. And so when I assume negative intent or or bad intent. I'm often telling the world more about myself than I am about the person that was speaking. So let's ask a question here from Michigan. And this person says, Vance, they like the suggestion of humor because it cuts across so many groups, but they're a little nervous about offending someone because everybody's sense of humor is so different. And so how would you respond to, and this kind of leads into or goes with the intention assumption situation, how would you advise this person about their very sensitive fear of offending through humor?
If you don't want to offend anyone, the only way to do that is to not speak at all. And even in some cases, not speaking, it can be considered offensive to other people. They'll say, well, your silence is complicity in this thing. So we live in a world where if you are trying very hard not to hurt anybody's feelings unintentionally, that's good. But if you're also preventing yourself from stepping out and trying new things and exploring ideas, one of the philosophers that I really find quite interesting is a guy named Jordan Peterson, and he talks about this idea that you don't know what you think until you say it out loud. And I think that if you are going to use social media, one of the ways that you can use it is, I have a strong opinion, loosely held. So I'm going to put an idea out into the world, and if somebody comes along and corrects it, I'm not bad for having done that. And if I put an idea out there and I discover that the way that I described that cut deeply at somebody in a way that I didn't mean for it to, well, then that allows me to go back and revise what I'm thinking. Social media, we can view it as we are putting ideas out into the world. But if you are only putting ideas out there and not allowing those things to impact you, then you're a billboard. And you don't want to be a billboard. You want to be a person that is taking those things and using the benefit of people reflecting back to you that something you said didn't quite land and that you should go back and edit and hone and make it better. So the idea of not offending somebody maybe comes from a good place, but realize that that input can help you actually get better and sharper and more clear in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that our worry about offending others somehow has reached a feverish pitch, especially during the pandemic. Anyway, I really appreciate that. So let's move on to another question. One of our viewers, and by the way, I think we have 200 people on today, participants, so that's just fantastic. Thank you so much for tuning in. One of our participants, David, says, he has a conundrum because yesterday he wrote to one of the government agencies to support the use of one of the agricultural technologies. And then he posted his support on Twitter and Facebook. So he received a call from a cousin who didn't agree with him and talked about how big ag is ruining the world, basically, and that particular technology is harmful. And he's just kind of at a loss as to how to respond to a family member who disagrees so adamantly about him, and also whom he suspects has not the correct information. So, Neen, what would you say to David?
David, I think, what you're experiencing is not unique to you. And thank you for having the courage to reach out and share that with us, because there are other people who've been in that same situation. My dad and I don't agree on a lot of things either. And my life is very public because of my profession. And so one of the things that I think we have to think about is going back to your intention is pure. Your intention is to be able to elevate this industry and to help keep those conversations going. And not everyone is going to be an advocate of that particular perspective. And so what I like to do is, using that framework, global, local, global, is start out, David, with here's where I'm coming from and how this affects the world. Here's my particular opinion and why that's important for my profession, for my family, and for what's important for my community. And here's that, how's that affects the economy, the planet, whatever it is. Doesn't mean that your cousin will agree with you, honey, but what it does do is gives you an opportunity to share that in that framework. The other thing that I love to do when, say, for example, hypothetically, my dad doesn't agree with everything that I do or say, I would ask a really simple question. Well, tell me more about, what you're thinking, or explain to me a little bit more about where you're coming from, or help me understand. And so I love being curious. I've already mentioned that. I love to come from a place of curiosity, and just ask, hey, tell me why you think that, or please explain that to me, with a genuine listening to listen, not listening to respond. So that's the other key here, I think, too. So hopefully that helps, David. But please know, honey, not everyone is going to be on board with everything that we share, and that's okay. That's totally okay.
Yeah, I often say I never lose, I win or I learn. And I think to both your point, Neen, and to Vance's point, if somebody corrects me, I think that's great. As long as it's done respectfully, I think it's fantastic. I just learned something. But again, we talked earlier about how some people embrace change more than others. And I'm on that way on the end of the scale of embracing change. And sometimes that sometimes that makes other people uncomfortable. I'm so far in that scale. Okay, here's a question from Dennis, who is a self-proclaimed introvert. Dennis, believe it or not, I get where you're coming from. How do I compensate for a slightly introverted personality in order to get my story out there? How do I do that? Vance, what do you think about Dennis's, what he calls compensate? But I think there's a way to make introversion actually a boon in a social media environment. But Vance, what do you think?
So I have a podcast called the Vance Crowe Podcast, and I'm always looking for people that have novel ideas. And so I'm combing through social media and trying to find people that are talking about things. And there's a person that I have found that is completely fascinating, and he goes by at the Mulk Man, so milk with an A. And the reason I bring this up is I have asked him. He's the only person I've ever invited onto the podcast twice and been turned down twice. But his response has been, I would really like to talk with you, but I'm an introvert and I'm much better at just writing my ideas out, hammering on them, and then working them through. And I have to respect him because I read what he writes, how he thinks about trade, how he thinks about money, and I don't even agree with everything that he says, but I find his way of articulating it so powerful that I not only go and read it regularly, probably more than I read almost anything else, but I tell everyone I know about it. And the reason that I think this is emblematic is find the place where you are comfortable and where you can actually leverage the thing that you're good at. Because the Mulk Man has definitely got, it's a small audience, but hyper dedicated. And the more people that hear about him, they go out and talk about him to other people and draw attention there. And you can do that too. And just like Neen had said, maybe it's not on social media. Maybe it's writing a newsletter. Maybe it's doing something where you control the message, and the only people that are going to engage with you are people that are going to have delicate, quiet, thoughtful discussion. Go there, lean into that, and leverage it as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I love what he's saying about leverage. There is a phenomenal author in this area called Susan Cain. She has a TED Talk called The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And she has a book by the same title. I am so fortunate to be married to an introvert. I mean, poor guy, like this is what he has to deal with from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. And I get called the Energizer Bunny by all of my clients. But one thing that is powerful about introverts is the quality of connection, right? Extroverts work into a room and they're like, woohoo, people to play with, yay, and they have all these conversations. An introvert works into a room and goes, that person looks interesting. You have a deeper conversation. I would leverage the power of that. So think about forums. If you want to use video that feels really authentic to you, just short videos that's demonstrating your expertise. But you don't have to go and sit and listen to, 200 people on Clubhouse if that's not really your scene. So I would leverage your expertise. There is something so amazing about the power of being an introvert and the quality of connection that you have. Now, I'm not saying extroverts don't have quality connections. I'm just suggesting that you are probably better when it comes to a networking event where you just have a small number of conversations and they're very, very connected conversations. So definitely leverage it. But I always make sure as an extrovert that I have an introvert that can also help balance me as well. So if you have people in your team who are more extroverted, then also watch and see what they do, just like I learned so much of the introverts in my life as well.
And even I think with introverts, practice makes it easier. When I first started dipping my toe into the social media water quite a number of years ago, it was really difficult for me, but I just kind of went slowly and posted things that I felt really good about and that I'd worked through in my mind. And the more you do it, the better you get at it and the more comfortable you become. So that's, I think just starting is often the hardest part.
And you don't have to be on all of them. That's the key. Please don't let someone, just because there's a sexy new platform available, doesn't mean you have to be on it, right? So think about the conversations you want to have. Where do those people go? If you are dealing more with the professionals, the corporate, the large organizations, LinkedIn is a great place for you to play. If you're looking at more of the visuals, then something like Instagram can be really fabulous there. But think about the platform. You don't have to be on everyone, but really think who would benefit from the conversation we're having and where do they play? And that is the place to start. Don't try and think about the new sexy thing. There's plenty of platforms I'm not actively involved in, but I do know where my clients are and the audiences that I serve.
So eat the elephant one bite at a time is what I'm hearing. That's one of the things I like to remind myself. So we have a really good question from Megan. And Vance, coming to you first, just because you have experience in this area. She says, often in agriculture, we hear a bit of kind of talking down to younger generations, or conversely, complaints that older generation is unwilling to change or unwilling to listen. What are ways we can think about bridging the generational gap that exists in agriculture and everywhere, but particularly when we're talking to our peers in agriculture?
Well, the reason that I found that dichotomy of the yin and the yang, of the ordered and the chaos, is because as the director of millennial engagement, I had to think about how do you talk people into, hey, there is change coming, and yet the change is not inherently correct. It's not automatically right. And really, that is the generational shift. The thing that you're describing in that question has gone on since the dawn of time. You can hear Plato write, or Aristotle write about what Plato said, that children don't listen anymore and that they don't follow their parents in the way that they used to. And it's because this is the constant thing that happens. The people that become ordered adults that we look up to, they know how to work the system in the paradigm that they were in. But the paradigm is changing, and that's where that chaos is. So it's finding a way to say, let's add a little bit of chaos. Let's not try and just keep it as ordered, because order without any sort of disorder or chaos is tyranny. But chaos without any order is just it's just anarchy, right? There's nothing new there. So really trying to be a bridge between those two worlds, between the people that are bringing ideas that make you uncomfortable and understanding why the system was built the way that it was, makes you a very powerful person. It makes you the type of person that can jump an idea over that wave of chaos and make productive things happen. So if you've identified that problem, then you are clearly a person that can jump in there and do something about it.
The other thing that we could build on with that brilliant answer is think about the modality of delivery. When you think about our oldest generation, they love a face-to-face meeting. That's how they grew up. That's how they learned to communicate. So look for those opportunities to do that. The baby boomers, they love doing things in teams of people, in groups of people. They copy everyone on the email and everyone gets invited to the conference or the email, right? And the meeting. And then you look at Gen X, which is where I fit in, and we're like, just leave us alone. Send me a note and then I'm done, right? Fiercely independent. Please just send me a text message or I'm out. And then you look at the next generation who everything's about group text, everything. They go to the prom together, like everything is together and it's en masse, and social media is a big part of their world. But then look at the next generation, right? So when you look at generation kind of Z and how they're communicating, it's actually come full circle. They want face-to-face communication too, but they do it on video. So the generations are so similar as they change. It's the modality of delivery of message that might need to be tweaked. If you have the luxury of meeting with someone and sitting down face to face, in our world right now, that happens to be virtual on camera. That's one way of delivering the message to the generations. But also think through, rather than talking down, think about leveraging the technologies or the modes that they like to communicate on, and then use that as the message delivery platform. We talk about a whole section on how to get attention in this book for the different generations. It was something I was fascinated by when I was researching the book, because there's actually more similarities than there are differences.
I think that's a really important point, because listen, us v them is kind of a human thing, right? We are tribe. We like to form tribes. We like to identify ourselves with others, and we like to identify what makes us different by an us versus them mentality. So I think young, whether it's young old or farmer not farmer or urban rural or whatever it is, we tend as humans to fall into us v them, because we're constantly seeking identity, I believe. So if we can become very cognizant of when we automatically fall into us v them, and avoid assigning labels, I think that makes us look at the similarities rather than the differences, and that really helps ease the communication a lot. So I love that constant awareness of, hey, did I just assume an intention? Did I just assign them in an other category when really they don't belong in that other category? Or I try to avoid that. So let's see. For Vance, when it comes to your point about depth of knowledge, and I referring to when you talked about being an expert using humor or depth of knowledge, comedy or depth of knowledge, I'm not an expert on every part of agriculture. Is it possible that I can still connect with people even on topics that I'm not really deep in knowledge on?
Neen used one of my favorite words, which is curiosity. And curiosity is, if you go look at Carl Jung, one of the psychologists, he talks about curiosity is actually the way that your inner self orients yourself towards what you should be doing next. And so if you're looking around at the world of agriculture and you're saying there's things I don't know about, but I'm curious about them, then going to discover those and trying to learn something new allows you to find stuff that just hasn't been out there for you. And if you then share what you learned that you became fascinated by through what you were curious about, you will find things that other people also find interesting. So my push for you would be to say, what of the parts of agriculture am I curious about? Not what do I think people should talk about, not what do I feel like other people think is the right thing to do, but what am I curious about? Because that's what will make you unique in your in what you're doing, and the discoveries that you make there will resonate with other people.
Yeah, agreed. And also, you know, the other thing that I always think about, my dad, I love my dad. He is the most curious person. He's 80 and still curious about everything. And so even when you don't know what to say to someone, if you're in person or in a conversation and you haven't, like, I have no idea what to say to this person, and that happens to me less now than it used to, but I always think, ask a question. I mean, ask a question. Those people like to talk about themselves and their views, and it always breaks the ice when you start asking questions and you're curious about them.
Socrates was famous for the way that he would ask questions, and the Socratic method is a very common understanding of questioning methodology, and we can put that on the sponsor page as a resource. I have a whole blog with a list of questions you can ask. So one of the great things about being an expert in something is you could help teach us that. So focus on that. But if you don't know something and you're curious about it, I love what Vance is saying, but take us on the journey with you and say, here's something I'm learning. What do you all know about that? Get input, get sources, get white papers. And so sometimes you might be the conduit of helping teach someone else something as well. And I think that's really powerful too. You don't have to be an expert on everything, but I bet you're an expert on at least 10 things. Start there. If you even just looked at 4 things you were fabulous at, that's a post a week. That's a whole month's worth of posting if you're looking at social media. So I bet there are some phenomenal things that you could tell us about. And as you have that curiosity or you ask more questions, share with us the answers you get so we can learn with you on the journey.
Yeah, when my son was a teenager, he's 31 now, but when he was a teenager, you move the teenagers downstairs at a certain point in time. They don't have the bedrooms upstairs anymore. You move them downstairs. I think with boys, it's particularly good because you get the kind of the teenage boy smell out of the upper part of your house. But we moved him downstairs, and I put a big bumper sticker on his door that said, "Why is that?" Because I always wanted him for the rest of his life, when he heard something, to ask, why is that? Why is that? And to look into why that might be. So we are winding down, and we have just a couple of minutes left. Quick closing thoughts from each of you, starting with Vance, and then we'll wrap it up.
I mean, this is enjoyable. And if you're looking for a way to think about things in different ways, I hope you explore different platforms. And I'll just say that if you liked what we talked about here, I know Neen has a book. I have a podcast called the Vance Crowe Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at Vance Crowe. And I would love to, get you engaged and keep this conversation going into the future.
Fabulous. There's only one Neen James online, so you can come find me on Instagram. I play and post every day. But remember, your voice matters, and your voice is important. Show people sometimes rather than tell them. Your story is so powerful, and literally what you do changes the world. So never forget that. Take the opportunity wherever possible to think about, in this virtual environment, how can you share more conversations with video, with visuals, use some metaphor. It has been such a privilege to serve you today with this fabulous panel. Thank you for Polly and Vance. What an amazing job you've both done.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm on Twitter too at @PollyPencilPlow. We also have checkoff news available on the USB website. Thanks so much. Thanks to the Farmers of USB for sponsoring the session, and we will catch you later.